Festag is a wonderful time of the year, and the holidays are shaping up to be even better, with the Shadow and the Blade dropping 2 weeks before Christmas. Got the decorations all set up throughout my house, gonna pull the trigger on a new computer for Cyber Monday, the first snows of winter will be falling very soon, Mortal Empire's turn times are about to be a hell of a lot faster, and Malice Darkblade will soon be drinking worlds alongside his buddy Zarkan.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
So I get back home from Thanksgiving break, and what's the first thing that greets my eyes but what looks like a bombshell for the Total War Warhammer trilogy. Apparently, the timeline is out the window. The Warhammer world and everything we know about it is about to come crashing down around our heads. Unbeknownst to us, this is the Super Smash Bros. Of fantasy, an all-star game of all the most iconic dudes and dudettes of the last 10,000 years. At any moment, Anarion and Sigmar are going to pop out of the multiverse to lead their peoples into a glorious new age of conquest. We into the Spider-Verse now, boys. So, I mean, surely, any character from any timeline is on the table now, right? You see the quotes, you see them right there. That has to be what that means. Well, not exactly. As the internet loves to do, the quotes were taken out of context and have since been amended to more accurately reflect their intent. At the top of the screen, we have Will from CA and the taken out of context quotes. There is no timeline. It's Smash Bros. Don't let a simple timeline prevent you from hyping up any given character. It's all on the table. And the quotes below are the more amended versions after the homies realized the can of worms they had just opened once the interwebs caught wind. But no matter how you want to read into it, the idea of a timeline, or lack thereof, raises a lot of questions about Total War Warhammer and the future of the trilogy. Now, the concept of lightning in a bottle Total War isn't exactly new. It's the idea that all the best elements of a setting or time period should be depicted no matter what, even if they're anachronistic. It's exactly what I want from a game like Total War Warhammer 40k, and it's exactly what I want for end times content as well. Not something that necessarily has to follow a particular story or outcome, but instead takes all the great moments, interesting characters, and best designed units, and throws them into a cauldron that still logically follows the rules of the universe. Now, the reason we're talking about this in the run-up to Festag is, of course, because Joan of Arc is coming as the free LC. Repanse the Mayonnaise, Demoiselle de Guerre, a Bretonnian paladin born more than 500 years before the start of Total War Warhammer's campaign. How is that possible? How is she still alive? What is going on here? Well, Repanse de Lyonesse represents what could be a new trend for the series, opening the floodgates to a whole host of lords we never thought we'd have a chance to see. Now yes, one swallow does not a summer make, but when you combine it with the quotes from CA, it does seem like the people over in Horsham are broadening their horizons a bit. But even with the blessings of the lady, even having supped from the Grail itself, 500 years old is severely pushing it for a human peasant in Warhammer Fantasy. So, how is she still alive? I mean, there are more than a few lore explanations and headcanons we could go with here, but really, it just boils down to CA getting their girl with the approval of GW. That's it. And the lack of a banner notwithstanding, it certainly seems like the majority of this community is reacting pretty positively to her inclusion. Joan of Arc is a beloved historical character, so it stands to reason the same story and a cutie with a bowl cut who can slice up demons left, right, and center would go over pretty well here. And we've seen characters stretch the timeline a bit before. Generally, the two lords people bring up are Vlad von Karstein and Azhag the Slaughterer. Now, I've been battling this misconception for like 4 years, but the last time I talked about it on video was a really long time ago, and I've never had this kind of reach in the past. But just so we can finally, hopefully, kill this misinformation off for good, Azhag the Slaughterer is not an example of a character who died long before the setting of Total War Warhammer. He dies in 2515 at the Battle of Osterwald in the lore, more than a decade after Karl Franz becomes Emperor in 2502, and more than a decade after the start date of Total War Warhammer's campaign. So his inclusion did not mess with the timeline in any way, shape, or form. I think that idea started on Reddit or Total War forums or something in a thread that got him and Gorbad Ironclaw confused, and that myth kind of got perpetuated over the years, and I've seen it literally hundreds of times, people saying Azhag is long dead before the start date for Warhammer's campaign, and that's definitely not true. As for Vlad, yes, he also was hanging out 500 years before the current 8th edition timeline, and he and Isabella do bite the big one at the Siege of Altdorf around that time. But Vlad is a vampire. Vlad is undead. Vlad is a character specifically known for his ability to resurrect from basically anything with the Von Karstein ring. In the lore, he gets his head blown off by a cannonball, and he comes right back. He dies so many times, and so often, he starts doing it for fun, to become his little vacations away from the monotony of the Warhammer world. And more than that, he ends up making a huge impact on the story when Nagash resurrects him in modern day. So he is not a particularly good example of CA abandoning the timeline either. Which leaves us with Repanse. What exactly does her inclusion mean for future characters? Are we gonna see a free-for-all with Magnus the Pious, Sigmar, and Anarion playing Helicopter Dick as we move into Game 3's version of Mortal Empires? Well, probably not. But there are legendary lords that Repanse could open the door for. Characters that never died on screen. Characters that might have indeed been active a very long time ago, but who wouldn't change any of the story arc if they entered the modern era. The issue with a character like Magnus the Pious being in the game is that he's from a race that isn't blessed with long life. He clearly died, his inclusion in modern day would completely screw up the timeline in a major way, and he fills the exact same role as Emperor Karl Franz. Literally, they are both Emperors of Man, with the same seat and the same jurisdiction. That's very different from someone like Constant Drakenfels, for example, a nameless horror who has stalked the land since before the Old Ones forged warp gates at the poles of the planet, a necromancer who has perfect lore justification to reappear at any given point in time. There are some retcons CA can make with Games Workshop's approval that have no functional impact on the timeline whatsoever, ones in which there is no detriment, no downside, other than maybe some people not liking the character by themselves. So, if CA can include any character or lord that perhaps wasn't active during 8th edition, but doesn't screw with the setting in any tangible way, then I welcome them with open arms. I may not like the character in and of themselves, but I don't have an issue with them tackling someone from a long time ago. That's why I don't have an issue with Repanse. Her story isn't any different if it happened in the year 500, 1500, or 2500. Bretonia isn't any different no matter when she enters the fort. There is no fallout from that story arc changing a bit. The date is just a date at that point. It can change, and nothing else functionally changes. But to go back to Magnus or Sigmar, for example, I think we can all agree the world would look tremendously different if either of them were still leading the Empire hundreds or thousands of years after they took the throne. And one of the most important faces of the game, the Franz himself, I mean, logically, it wouldn't make any sense for him to be ruling the Empire at that point. So those are lords I can't get behind. And that means, as with anything really, all this comes down to is a case-by-case basis. There are dozens of amazing characters from Warhammer Fantasy Battle lore that have absolutely no business whatsoever becoming playable in this trilogy. I love Anarion the Defender, as do many of you. Solo demon hordes before breakfast, lunch, and dinner, baby battered Marathi, just a beast through and through. Really cool character, but he has no business being playable in Mortal Empires. CA knows that, you know that, we all know that. Yeah, sure, if you want to give him his own expansion, actually that'd be dope. I would love for them to do a timeline thing where they go in and do War of the Beard or Anarion's War Against the Demons, all that kind of stuff. Those kind of expansions well after Warhammer 3 is well completed, I think that'd be fantastic. But in terms of actually adding him to the core game, absolutely not. He's been dead for the better part of 8,000 years. It would change huge parts of the story arc should he pop in for a visit and lead the Azure. And he would steal the Thunder of Lords whose thunder should not be stolen. Malekith, Tyrion, Teclis, all those characters don't make very much sense if Anarion the Defender is leading the High Elves and Dark Elves into battle. But on the flip side, Repanse and Creative Assembly's response to her inclusion should raise some eyebrows for sure. I've been saying it for a while now, but Games Workshop is nowhere near as protective of this IP as some would have you think. Not when it comes to Total War Warhammer. Time and time again, the boundaries of this series have been pushed and stretched, and sometimes outright broken, and our expectations for content have shifted alongside. Maybe not always for the better. especially if you're coming at this from the perspective of a lore purist. Perhaps you do believe that 2502 should be the beginning and the end for Legendary Lords, that it should be the date around which all of this content revolves. And I think that makes sense. I think that is a perfectly reasonable perspective to have. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here. But one thing is for sure, Repanse has opened the door for a new wave of lords. The only question is, who's next?